You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Well, hello, Shannon. Welcome to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. Thank you so much for making time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm happy that you're here because I think we've talked about some aspects of yin yoga. We've kind of mentioned it in previous podcasts in the context of flexibility and mobility, and in the context of putting sustained stress or tension on our fascia. But there's a whole side of the yin yoga practice that we haven't even touched on or delved into. And that's why I'm so pleased to have you here today to talk about these more kind of hidden or secret benefits of yin yoga. But before we dive into them, I'd like to start, if it's okay with you, by finding out a little about your experience of yin. How did you, I know you've got a pretty impressive arm balance and inversion practice, so I know that yin isn't everything you do. How did you stumble across it, and what was that experience like for you?
I stumbled into yin kind of accidentally. I didn't know what it was. And it was during a very busy time in my life when I was wrapping up graduate school and I was looking at starting a new career. And my life was really busy. And like you said, I was very into the arm balances and inversions and the yang styles of yoga and challenging my body and seeing what I could do physically. And yin just kind of came to me, and I ended up in a class not really knowing what to expect. And I didn't realize how much I needed it. I think at the time I was kind of running on empty. I had reached a point where I felt like I was giving more than I was bringing in. I was depleted. And that first yin class, I just felt so grateful for the ability to just rest and to be quiet and to become more introspective and aware of my internal environment, which was something that was lacking in my practice.
Sounds very different from my first experience of yin, which was a really big class in a heated studio, like maybe 50 or 60 people. And the teacher started the class and then she said, shoelace. And that's all she said for 5 minutes. So I'm looking around the room going,
You had to look around.
oh, okay, Gomukhasana legs. And then, 5 minutes later, I'm doing Gomukhasana, dying and wondering why everybody else looked so quiet and serene, and why I was there going, face twitching, sweat dripping off nose. So yeah, I came to it a little bit more slowly than you did. But I love the fact that you've straight away dived into some of the more subtle aspects, because I presume with a long-standing practice, you probably didn't have that much of a focus on building your range of motion. What you noticed straight away was that nourishing quality, that feeling of filling up the spaces that were empty or depleted.
Yeah, and I was also really curious about the sensations, because in a vinyasa practice or a more yang style of practice, you don't typically, unless it's like Iyengar, you don't have time to really delve into the layers of sensation like you can in yin. And I found it really interesting how at the beginning of a posture, I might feel sensations in a certain way in a certain location. And then toward the end, it might have shifted, it might have moved, it might have grown brighter or maybe dimmer. And so I found that part really interesting and something that I started to gravitate toward too, as well as the point of release, like coming out of the posture and feeling the recirculation and the warmth and pulsation and things like that. And so I was really curious about what was happening physically. And it really started leading me to learn more about the body, about the connective tissue. And it also kind of opened the door toward learning more about the subtle or energetic body.
Mm. You've pulled out two things there that I really want to underline. And the first one is that observation of changing sensation. I had a teacher once who
Hmm.
described it in a way that has stuck with me ever since. She said, imagine a glass of water, and then you drop in a little drop of ink or paint, and you just see how the colors swirl and change shape and change intensity. And I've always, ever since, used that as my visual for how the sensation shifts and swirls and
I
changes. And
love
it's
that.
kind of like
Yeah.
smoke. It's hard to put your
Uh-huh.
finger on, but it's quite fascinating to observe. And then the other thing that you said there that I loved was the sort of the after. We think, I think, a lot in life about the thing, doing the thing, and we don't think so much about what happens after the thing is done. And in yin, we do
Hmm.
the shape, we do the pose, and then there's the release or the exit. And it's almost as if you don't get a full picture or a full experience until it's finished. And there's that sort of response or rebound. And that to me is such a huge part of the experience of yin, is the sort of the forgotten potential of what happens when you finish doing the thing. So
Right.
we've kind of
Right.
dived right into it already. So I might let you take over from here. You're going to talk us through some of your perceptions of what are the more secret or hidden benefits of yin. And you might have covered some already, but let's talk through the things that really came to mind for you.
Yeah, I think the first thing just in this conversation that comes to mind is it sharpens our awareness of our bodies, of
Mm,
our inner world. It really helps to fine tune that awareness. And there is this forced mindfulness when we're moving in a more vigorous practice, that we're focused moment to moment on what's happening, but there's not the same sort of endurance with it. I
mm,
guess you could say, like almost like meditative, where you're watching and you're patiently observing, and that moment to moment awareness of the more subtle sensations, strengthening our ability to really stay connected on that moment to moment scale. And I think that that's so important, especially in this culture and the type of lives that we lead, which tend to be really full and busy. And
mm,
we're thinking about what's next, not necessarily present in the moment. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is how to just be patient, how to stay, whether it's something that's uncomfortable physically or emotionally, or it's something that I enjoy. Just resting in the awareness has been hugely beneficial in my life.
mm. I saw you describe that somewhere as the difference between a car trip, A to B,
Yeah,
versus walking or, taking a little toodle pip on your bike, this much slower cadence. And instead of it just being about the destination, noticing all of the little things along the way, the patterns of light and shade and little details of the environment around you. I think dogs are really good
right.
for that because they make us kind of go slow and sniff things
Yeah,
and, look around. That difference in pace between the kind of mindfulness that we have in a more active practice and the kind of mindfulness that we have in this really quiet, still, introspective, more static practice.
right. Like, and when we're in our cars, I think the way I wrote about this is, we're thinking about where we're going. We're thinking
Mm,
about that final destination versus hearing the birds and seeing the way the light filters through the trees, and all the little nuances that we could miss if we weren't present. And that's, I think, what sets yin aside from any other form of practice, is you have that chance to, sensation is a great hook. You have that hook of sensation that you can come back to. And it's human nature. I do this too. Like, I'm not a perfect practitioner. I'll be in a pose and I find myself thinking about, oh, what am I going to make for dinner? But I can come back. The sensation is something like an anchor point that I can
mm.
always come back to, and I can investigate again.
I love that. And
And
I
I
think
think that
it's,
translates to off the mat in so many ways.
oh, 100%. I think for students
Mhm.
who are really brand new to the pace of yin, you ask a question, how do you feel? And often the answer is like, yeah, fine. But with
Yeah.
yin, you've then got, maybe 5 more minutes of asking, yeah, but how do I feel? Or what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? What quality does that sensation have? Can I touch it? Is it moving? All of these things that take you way, way, way beyond, I feel fine, or I feel that in my hip. And that level of detail, I think, is something that once we've learned it, we can take it to, everything. Like, my knee hurts. Now, am I feeling that in the muscles? Am I feeling that inside the joint? What quality does that sensation have? What seems to make it better? What seems to make it worse? Once we learn that capacity to pay attention, we can apply it to anything: physical, emotional, whatever comes up in life.
Hmm. And that question of you're the way you're describing, oh, I feel fine. It's
Fine.
like we
Yep.
look past all of the subtleties, and that's normal. And I think as teachers, it can be a really powerful tool to be able to guide students, to not tell them what to feel. I never want to put any ideas in their head, but to maybe describe where the sensation should be felt,
Mm,
and ask them. I like to ask questions when I teach, like,
mm,
what's the quality of the sensation? Is it close to the skin? Is it deep? I think asking questions can help students to really um, develop that skill of interoception.
and we're learning so much in research about the importance of that skill, that
Hmm.
interoceptive ability being a really sort of unexpected way to manage pain, for example, is just to be more aware of what we're feeling. Whereas I think for a lot of us, when we experience pain, our reflex action is to kind of wall it off or shut it out or ignore it so that
Yeah.
we can get on with life. It teaches us to kind of make friends with it a little bit and investigate in more detail. And often when we do that, the experience isn't as monolithic as we maybe thought it was.
Yeah. And I think that just being able to know when we're in pain, which
Mm,
seems like common, it seems like we should know, but I think some people are so shut off from it, because maybe they are in so much pain. They're so shut off from it because of that tendency, that human nature to fix it by distracting ourselves, however that might look.
mm,
But asking, like, is the sensation sharp or shooting? Like, describing the things that we want to avoid. If
mm,
that's what you're feeling, then let's come out of this, or let's modify.
mm,
If it's something that's more like fidgeting type of discomfort, or maybe something just more mild in nature, then is it okay to stay there? And
mm,
teaching that discernment, I think, um, that's such a I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do for students, is giving them the tools to be able to discern the different kinds of sensations they're feeling, and playing their edges in different ways, and really knowing their body's limitations, but also being able to test their strengths and their
mm.
bounds.
So I
I
feel
think
like
that's
we're
one of the
almost heading into just sort of offshoot territory, that first thing that you talked about being cultivating the quality of interoception. And then we've got two
mm,
offshoots from that. One is our capacity to be with discomfort, which everything in modern life really is geared to avoid. We should never have to be in discomfort. We've got lots of tools we can draw on to numb discomfort or block it out or distract
right.
ourselves or get it over and done with more quickly. Hey, I'm all for that in certain circumstances. I'm definitely not a glutton for punishment. But as you said, there are times in our lives where it's really important to know, what am I actually feeling? And what quality does that have? Is it physical pain? Is it emotional pain? Is it boredom? Is it irritation? And that
Mhm.
capacity that you spoke about to sit with it in conversation, to investigate, to make space for curiosity in a really safe way, knowing that in yin, we don't have to be in pain, whereas in life, maybe we do. But in yin, there's that safety aspect of, I can come out if I need to. I can change my setup if I need to. I can prop myself if I need to. But maybe this is something I could sit with and investigate.
Right. And that's empowering too, isn't it? To be able to to notice what we're experiencing and then to decide, what do I need in this moment? Um, I love how Bernie Clark, he talks about the Goldilocks theory a lot and finding that spot that's just right. And I have a tendency to want to make myself really comfortable. And so I'll find myself kind of fidgeting and fidgeting. I'm like, wait a minute, is this necessary? Or
Mm.
can I stay where I'm at right now because I'm not experiencing pain? And maybe I can learn something in this moment that I'm in right now. Maybe I can learn something from my body or from what do I keep fidgeting for? A lot of times I'm moving, I'm changing my position because it's mentally uncomfortable. Or
Mm.
there might be some emotion under the surface that's wanting to come up, and I'm like, no, 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 I'm not quite ready for you yet. But I think that uh, finding space for those things, like you're talking about, creating space is so important to being able to come face to face with all the things that we deal with in life.
Yeah. And there's a fine line for that, isn't there? Because some of us have the tendency to make ourselves too comfortable or to always want to be comfortable. I definitely sit in that camp in yin and in life. But I
Mhm.
see other people who they have the opposite tendency. They want to get right into the discomfort. They want to feel so much sensation. They want, to be overwhelmed with sensation. They're not feeling enough. And for them, it's almost a practice of the opposite of self-compassion. Like, maybe I don't need to feel that much. Maybe I could recalibrate my settings to something that's much more subtle. And maybe the experience is different, but maybe that's enough. So what do you think about
Mhm.
that side of the equation, that the people who are seeking sensation and really wanting to lean into it?
Yeah, I see that a lot. And in a group class, I think it's you want to be able to kind of teach the middle ground, kind of
Mm.
teach to everyone who's in the room. And um, gosh, there's so many ways I could answer this. I think that type A tendency is just
Hmm.
what I'm
More,
reading
more,
into
more.
what you're asking. The type A, yeah, like wanting to heal, wanting to kind of push our physical limits. I think just reminding throughout the class, reminding like this isn't we're just looking to experience a little bit, like the beginning of a stretch or just
Mm.
subtle sensation. And I like to teach with props. So showing props, showing the use of props when I set up, I always show with the props. And I don't even really teach without them anymore. And so just not even making that a choice.
Mm.
Because I think sometimes people come into the yin practice like I came into it, the beginning, not knowing what it was, not knowing why I shouldn't go to my end range right away. Um, but I think just those gentle reminders, but ultimately, it's in their hands. We do our best as teachers to guide and to protect, but ultimately it's in the student's hands.
Mm. And I think even more so in yin than other styles, there is this very individual nature to it. Maybe you are teaching to a specific target area and you're offering 5 different shapes that students could take, or you are teaching
Hmm.
more to an outward shape and you giving them multiple different options of ways that they could arrange their props or ways that they could support their bodies. That even more so than more active practices, there is this very personal component that to me is a really big part of not mastering yin, because do you master it, but going from a beginner to a more experienced student is figuring out
Hmm.
what I personally am feeling today and what I personally you need uniquely today to take me to that spot where I've got the beginning of sensation, and it's not overwhelming but it's not nothing. It's that little hook for the nervous system to pay attention to, but it's not overwhelming me. Maybe I'm feeling something that's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's something I can sit with. This very tailored and individual experience. It's such a
Yeah,
core part of yin that for a lot of
there
students, I
is.
think is very new.
Yeah, for sure. And I like how the way Tiffany gives percentages. I like to think in percentages and to give that, she talks about like that 50 to 70% of your range of motion. And I think that sometimes when I use that, I don't use it enough anymore, but for a while I was using it in almost every class. And I would see people like back, like I would see them physically back out. I'm like,
Like,
oh, okay,
whoa.
that works for people. Yeah. So giving them a number. I also like the term like coming to feel the beginning of sensation, and
Mm,
let's stay there and let's investigate that, because in those more subtle layers we can really start to notice things that we might not otherwise notice when the
mhm,
sensation becomes really bright or really loud. Like, let's see how we can sharpen our ability to be really observant and really connected to those quieter sensations. And
mm.
in that way, you can maybe catch those type A tendencies, like let's see how far back we can go and still investigate and still start to kind of tease apart.
I agree. I like the range because for me, there's a softness, a broadness to a range that edge, which is often the phrase that teachers use, come to your edge. To me, is a little bit more intense. I'm imagining,
Hmm.
a cliff in Iceland where the land
Yeah.
just falls away. I've got to get to that edge and sit on that edge. Whereas if I think about 50 to 70%, I'm nowhere near the edge of the cliff. There's no danger of me
Hmm.
toppling off. I'm way back in rolling green meadows, just noticing the color of the grass and the way that it shifts in the wind. So I like the percentages as well. And there's an implication in there that my 50% is going to be different to your 50% because our 100% are different. And we don't often have that
Totally.
conversation in vinyasa yoga, that our bones are different, our joints are different, our soft tissues are different. So our end shape is so different that our 50 to
Hmm.
70% is going to be different too.
Right. And I like to also include the language around those different phasic changes as we hold for time. We might get that natural opening that happens that allows us to just naturally go deeper as we're staying for time. Time is what gives the pose its intensity. So I like that reminder too. It's not about how deep we go, but how long we can stay
Mm.
and stay in a place where we can be still. So that's something I speak to quite a bit when I teach, is how important the element of time is.
And I think that in itself is one of those hidden or secret benefits, is the power to stay, because
Hmm.
our culture is very much focused on progress and momentum and achievement. And we don't very often celebrate staying where we are. Maybe things change, maybe things don't change. Maybe you progress in inverted commas, the body softens a little and you go deeper. Maybe it's the opposite, the body hardens and asks you to back away. Maybe you stay exactly as you are. We really don't make the time for that very often in modern life, that
Hmm.
staying exactly where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's cool is when we stay, we see that we're not static. Like nothing stays the same. Whereas there's constantly changing. There's changes to our tissues. There's change in our mood and our emotions. It's constantly fluctuating. And I love being still for that. Is that staying, that capacity to stay and to be with those changes is a really powerful tool.
It's that sort of yin and yang balance, isn't it? Like the body becomes outwardly still,
Hmm.
but there's always a subtler level underneath it. Even within the outward stillness of yin, there's that little drop of yang, isn't there? Even if it's just, I can feel my breath moving or I can feel my heart beating. But often, when you do
Hmm.
attune yourself to that subtlety, you can see those little shifting tides and intensities in the sensation. So the more you kind of recalibrate your settings, the more of that subtle movement you start to perceive, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really fun to rest the attention on too, just to watch those tiny little changes over time.
That's
And I
definitely
love
fun in
that we
inverted
were
commas.
talking.
That's the yoga student's idea of fun,
Yeah,
is just
fun.
sitting still and watching sensation. Like, wow.
We're talking a lot about the physical aspects, but for me, watching the emotional fluctuations has been has been huge in my life. I've struggled with depression my whole life, and
Mm.
being able to sit with those emotions and not just tolerate them, but actually hold space for them and embrace them as they come up. Um, Man, that's powerful.
Mm. And that's not something
Hmm.
that any other aspect of our lives encourage.
Hmm.
We have, as you said earlier, that tendency to have an experience that is uncomfortable or unsettling and immediately shift to fix or distract. And again,
Right.
I'm not against it. I'm not against people seeking help for depression, for example, but there is a really underestimated power to just noticing how we are and allowing
Right.
ourselves to be how we are.
Yeah. And I think too, for my experience has been that when I sit with those uncomfortable emotions, and when I not just sit with them, but start to investigate them and um, put a little bit of loving kindness around them, what I
Mhm.
find is that they often lose their bite. Then they're
Mm.
not so scary, and it's not something that I have to try to avoid or push away. Uh, there's something really special about being able to just surrender to whatever's coming up. That I, yin is, I can't think of any other practice that allows for that. You know, even meditation. I think with yin, there's just this. We set ourselves up. I think of each posture as kind of a small meditation in and of itself,
Mm.
um, that I can kind of go through feeling the physicality of it. Then I can toggle over to the emotional body. I can, there's different things that I can look at, different lenses I can look through. But I've found nothing that I can compare, that just that ability to be able to hold space for the difficult emotions.
Mm. Or the easy emotions, to hold space for
Hmm.
things
Yeah,
however they are,
absolutely.
without
Hmm.
telling yourself a story about what that also means and what that also implies and where
Yes.
that's going, but just to stop with the first part of what am I actually feeling right now? And can I create space for that to be exactly as it is without needing it to change? And I love the
Hmm.
fact that you liken each pose to its own meditation, because I think yin can be a really good preparation for meditation, not just within a single session, but over the course of our practice. But it does have that level to it of giving you the hook that you spoke about, having sensation
Hmm.
as something kind of concrete, whether that's physical or emotional, something concrete that will capture the attention of the nervous system. Whereas I think for a lot of us, the open planes of meditation are a little too much. It's a little overwhelming.
Hmm.
In yin,
Exactly. Yeah.
we've got that
Yeah.
that
It can
thing to
feel,
hold us.
yeah, yin meditation can feel, for me in the past couple of years with the pandemic and
Mm.
all the uncertainty, to sit and meditate sometimes is just so overwhelming. But I know that I can come to a yin practice because I can choose like where to rest my awareness. I can choose to rest it in my body, and I can start there. And
Mm.
then, or I can go deeper, or I can switch between how I focus my attention, and it's not just sitting in this upright position. And I almost felt every time I meditated, and during the height of the pandemic, like this heaviness on my shoulders, and a feeling to need to kind of curl in on myself and be in a forward bend to like protect myself. So I I think what you're saying, it being kind of a doorway to meditation, or a gateway to, however you want to describe it, is so accurate, and it can be its own form of meditation.
Yeah, because as you said earlier, it teaches us that quality of interoception, that capacity to figure out how we're feeling and what we need. And as we figure that
Hmm.
out, we might choose to open the door and go on to meditation, but we might not. I'm feeling too heavy for
Hmm.
that right now. I need to curl in and protect myself. You wouldn't know that
Yeah.
without the skills that you developed from that quiet, reflective practice.
Hmm.
And I think the thing that we've been sort of circling around a little bit too is that yin gives us a really tactile experience of impermanence. That whatever we're
Hmm.
feeling, whether it's emotional or physical, it's probably going to change as we sit with it and observe it. And I think some people get that sense from meditation, but for me at least, it's easier to feel in yin where I've got those hooks for the nervous system to pay attention to.
Yeah, and how cool with yin that you get to play out impermanence, that idea of impermanence in every single pose. You get to play it out from the beginning of the pose to the end, all the different layers that we might experience through the hold and then that release that we talked about. You
Mm.
get the full spectrum. You get to see that play out
Yeah, you feel
inside of
within just a
five
few
minutes,
minutes,
10
this
minutes.
too shall
Hmm.
pass, whether it's good, bad,
Yes.
interesting, boring, irritating, whatever it is, this is going to pass probably in less
Right.
than the full duration of the pose.
Hmm. There's so much to take away too. So much to
Mm,
take away from a single pose.
mm. Yeah, I love that. So I feel like we've already got a pretty hefty catalog going on of our capacity to develop interoception, to know how we're feeling, staying power, sitting with whatever is, making space for it, making friends with it. Even we've talked about it teaching us to be with discomfort and to kind of ascertain whether what we're feeling is pain and we need to get out, change our orientation, or whether it's something that we could get curious about and look for details in. What are some of the other things that come to your mind as these more secret benefits of yin?
Gosh. Well, we talked a bit about how it's a gateway to meditation. I think
That's
also
right.
it's a gateway to the subtle body or the energetic body,
Mm,
and feeling the. I like to study the meridian lines and visualizing and sensing the movement to the meridian lines. I think can be really powerful. Teaching the meridian lines, teaching where they live in the body and how to influence them. Um, I've found that students really gravitate toward that lately, and
mm.
it's just another layer to add to their practice.
I love that because I think in a faster moving practice, it can be really difficult to create space to talk about, let alone experience anything other than the physical. This is where your feet are, this is what your
Hmm.
hips are doing, this is where your eyes are going, and breathe. And now the next thing, let's move on to the
Yeah.
next thing. And people know at the end of practice that they feel different, but there isn't that sort of leisurely quality of exploration along the way. It's very difficult to communicate the subtle body, I think, in faster moving practices. So how do you like
It
to do
is.
that in yin? How do you like to give students something that they can pay attention to that gives them that more energetic experience?
Yeah. I think showing them, and even at the beginning, palpating the lines on ourselves, like
Mm,
knowing where they start, where they end, describing their location, and giving them a little bit of information before we get going, because I do like to leave a lot of quiet space in the in practice so they don't just hear my voice the whole time. But
mm,
showing them where the landmarks are in the body and talking about some of the benefits that we might receive when we open these energetic channels. But then also just sprinkling in those ideas throughout the practice, because for a lot of students, it's going to be brand new information.
mm,
And I also love the power of visualization. And for example, when I teach the heart and the energetic lines, I'll have them sense the movement, the blood flow or pulsation, however you want to describe it, running from the heart space through the arms and the fingertips. And so I think that can be a really fun way to include them. But also teaching around the seasons. I love to teach a class on the elements at a transition, like from summer to fall or spring to summer. Just when we're noticing those changes around us in our environment, then thinking about the ways that we're changing internally.
Mm.
One that comes to mind is that change from summer to fall, which I'm craving right now because it's so hot here. But just sensing that coming from this really carefree time of year where maybe schedules are loose and we're traveling, to a more structured time where we're starting to turn in a little bit earlier and more focused on routine. And so I love to teach a class around the metal element in the fall, and just finding that ability to lean into the routines and lean into the rituals that make us feel a little bit more grounded.
Mm. I love that. And I think it's such a practical way to give people an experience of, um, we kind of mentioned earlier about our culture being very linear, kind of very progress driven, always forward and up, the only pace is forward. Shout out to Kirsten Beverly Waters. But nature doesn't work in that sort of linear way. It's not always forward and up. It's cycles, and from morning to night, from week to week, season to season, and giving students a really practical experience of that, noticing the changing tides of energy around them in the world, hopefully giving them a little
Mhm.
window into, well, maybe what I need now is a little different to what I needed 2 months ago, is a little different to what I needed 6 months before that, kind of opening people up to what they need being less static. This is what self-care
Mhm.
means for me, and more, it
Yeah.
depends on the day, and it depends on the season, and it depends on my mood, and it depends on what's going on around me and what's going on within me. This much more nuanced appreciation of what they might need from practice today.
Yeah, and awakening that sense, because sometimes, during transitions, we might not know why am I feeling this? Why am I
Mm,
feeling like I need to slow down? Like, what is this
mm,
niggling that's telling me, like, what is this from? And then opening our eyes to seeing, oh, there's changes around me right now. This is normal. This is part of being a human on this earth.
mm,
'Cause I think we live in a period of time where we can close ourselves off completely to the natural world. We can go from our air conditioned homes to our cars to our office or whatever and not really step foot on the ground. And we can isolate ourselves from what's happening around. But I think this practice allows us to open our eyes to those changes.
mm. And to me, that brings up that theme of self-compassion and self-care again, because there's this recognition in yin that I think we don't get in other styles of practice, or other styles of more active practice at least, that what I need today is probably going to be different to what I needed a month
Hmm.
ago, or even what I needed yesterday. And it just opens up this conversation with ourselves that, we don't tend to have in vinyasa, because this is what crescent lunge looks like, and this is what warrior 2 looks like, and this is what warrior 3 looks like. In yin, it really does depend, doesn't it, on not just the cycle of the season or the cycle of the month, but just on what's going on in our internal landscape. It opens up that
Hmm.
conversation for, what do I need today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, and in that way, I've written about this a few times. We get to become our own mothers and fathers. We get to be our own caretakers, and
mm,
it's that extra, really sacred time that we can give ourselves, and it doesn't have to be more than an hour-long practice one time a week. That can go a really long way. That can
mm,
carry us through the hardships of life, but just that special time that we can nurture ourselves and give ourselves what we need, really check in and know what we need and offer that to ourselves is so sacred.
and I do think, like you do, that the more practice we become at that within our practice, the more those skills kind of sneak outside of our practice into the rest of
Mm,
our lives as well, that we
hmm.
start to notice those details a little bit more. You also mentioned somewhere that you see yin as a connector. Is this the sort of
Mhm.
fascial connections between different parts of the body? How do you appreciate yin as being a connecting force?
So many ways. So yes, it can connect us to our bodies. It can connect us to that inner landscape that I think is so important to be able to tap into. But it can also connect us to each other.
Mm,
I during the pandemic, we were practicing in isolation. We were practicing at home during quarantines, and it's kind of fluctuated here where we'll open back up and then we have to close again. And I love a home practice, but there's something about being in a room with other people that
mm,
is indescribable. And we come to our mat. So many of us find yoga in an effort to heal ourselves from past injuries or traumas or whatever. We bring a lot of stuff with us, a lot of baggage with us, and we're all working kind of on the same thing. We're all working on ourselves, and to share that experience with other people is so powerful. And so I think the yin practice, practicing in a room full of people going through the same shit, it's really um, it's really special,
mm.
and it builds that sense of community and togetherness that is so needed.
Yeah, something that I've heard friend of the pod, Valerie Nopick, say in classes is there's somebody across the room who's feeling exactly the same as you're feeling right now. So it might not
Hmm.
be everybody in the room is feeling the same, but there's probably somebody who's feeling the same kind of discomfort that I'm feeling now. And as humans, I think we kind of think of ourselves as these sort of self-contained structures, especially as adults. Like we've got everything we need, we've got this sorted. But just the awareness that somebody else is feeling the same as us transforms
Hmm.
our experience of
Totally.
discomfort, joy, whatever it is, transforms that experience completely to think I'm sharing this with somebody else. I don't know who it is, but
Hmm.
somebody feels the same way. I feel I'm not alone in this.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
Something really, really tender about that, and vulnerable, but also deeply healing.
mm.
Hmm.
You've, I think, brought out a lot of the reasons that I have found yin practice interesting, beneficial, but also really challenging because there is that tenderness and vulnerability to it. There's less kind of outward structure. And so we're a little bit more, um, I guess, in a more mobile practice, the structure, the pace, the cadence kind of creates a container of its own. But in yin, where there's long periods of time where really nothing interesting is going on in the space around you, that that container has to be you. You've got to make space for that experience, and that, as a student, is a real learning process, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Because, like we've talked about, that tendency to want to mask or hide, or, to squelch the uncomfortable
Mm,
is is just human nature. And
mm.
to be able to sit with these things is, um, it's really challenging.
For people who haven't tried yin yoga, look, it's not just kind of dozing over a bolster. There's some
No,
really lovely, nourishing stuff, but there's some really hard stuff
yeah,
too. There's a real
it
discipline to it.
it doesn't look like much is going on from the surface. It might look really boring, and I think boredom is something we can explore. Like that
Mm,
tendency to want to fill every second of every day with something. I think there's so much to learn in those bored moments and mundane, because as adults we keep gathering more experiences and we do the same things, and it can start to feel really stale and really boring. But to find the sacredness and the mundane, to find the beauty in the mundane, I think makes life more precious.
I'm really pleased that you pulled that out actually, because we've talked a lot about the more intense sides of the spectrum. Like you might be feeling something really challenging, and the discipline of making space for that and getting curious about that. But you also might be feeling not much at all. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
today there is no internal emotional turmoil. Maybe today there is no real physical discomfort. Maybe you're a pretty flexible person, and when you sit at 50% of your range of motion, there isn't much sensation in your tissues to hook the nervous system's attention. So yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your predominant experience in this moment or in this practice today is you're not feeling much. You're kind of bored. And you're right, there's a
Mm-hmm.
really underestimated skill. We're so used to in modern life filling every unfilled space with stuff. I listen to podcasts or audiobooks every single moment of the day
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not using my ears
I do
for other
too.
things.
While I'm cleaning the house.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
yin creates that sort of external force to, well, you've got 5 minutes and you're just going to be bored for 5 minutes. And kids back in
Mm-hmm.
the day when I was a child, that was a pretty common feature of childhood. When you didn't have a device in your pocket and you didn't have an iPad, and maybe I hadn't brought a book with me, I'm just going to have to find ways to fill that space. And in
Yeah.
yin, less telling ourselves internal stories and just, can I just be bored for a few minutes? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if I'm bored for a few minutes?
Right. I mean, how special boredom, how privileged boredom is
I know
to
it's
be able
it's
to be bored like at times when we're going something through something really stressful or acute,
Mhm.
like boredom seems really great now.
Ain't that the truth? You
Yeah,
look
I
back and go,
agree.
God, those were the good
Uh-huh.
times when absolutely nothing interesting was happening.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's something to learn there. There's something to learn in every moment.
Mm. And I think you're right too, that the more attention we give it, the more nuanced that boredom becomes. And even boredom itself isn't monolithic. It shifts and changes, and it has that subtle internal movement to it.
Hmm. For sure.
I'm really pleased that you brought that out because, yeah, every now and again, somebody will, when I used to teach dedicated yin classes, every now and again, somebody would bring their, 10-year-old or 12-year-old during the school holidays. And kids and yin sometimes go together really well, but often kids and yin don't
Sometimes
go
not.
together. Yeah, watching their eyes kind of, wow, no one's doing anything, no one's saying anything, nothing interesting is happening. I love that.
We start to see, I know I have these, I tend to, move around a lot when I'm bored. I start to see these habitual patterns that start to arise in
Mm,
me that I don't even know I'm doing.
mhm,
I don't even realize I'm doing. And so again, we kind of see that tendency bubble to the surface, and then we have a choice. Like, what do I do? Do I do the thing? Do I tap my hands? Do I shift around, or can I just stay with this, whatever this is, and
mhm.
experience this vibration and let it pass?
I'm
Yeah.
sure I've mentioned this before, but I did a workshop years and years and years ago with a Bikram teacher, and he talked about the cosmic mirror because in Bikram, you're usually practicing facing yourself in a mirror. And I love that concept, and I've brought that to every aspect of my practice, even though normally I don't have a physical mirror there. The cosmic mirror is exactly that reflection that you're talking about. Or here I am,
Mm.
and I'm a little bit bored. What's the thing I always do? There's that thing I always do. There's that tapping of my hand. Or for me, I'm more likely to take myself on a mental journey, tell myself a story, or project into the
Hmm.
past, or project into the future. There's that thing I always do. It gives us this sort of enforced shape or practice that makes us reflect on habits that chances are don't just come up in yoga practice, but probably come up in daily life as well. Do I move?
Right.
Do I squirm? Do I push it away? Do I distract myself? Do I, lean into it and look for more? What's my tendency? And that gap between stimulus and response. Do I want to respond the same way here today, or do I want my response to be different?
Hmm. Being able to catch that moment between actually acting on it versus staying, that I think we're kind of touching on the one of the benefits that I think is is so rewarding in yin is um, the ability to learn how to respond rather than to react.
Mm-hmm.
We feel that rise, that initial tug toward change or toward trying to change our reality. Can I stay with that for a second? Can I sit with it, with the uneasiness, before I make a decision to move or to do whatever it is?
Could there be some
Mhm.
mindfulness around my response as opposed to just that
Right.
reflex action reaction?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
And being able to catch that,
mm.
that's a huge skill.
I agree. And I think there's some aspect of that too, that our sort of programmed behaviors, the things that we do unconsciously, they might be to distract or they might be to fidget. But even, guarding patterns, even the parts of ourselves that we harden or shield, can be some of those inbuilt responses. And when we
Mhm.
start to cultivate this gap, this sort of mindful, attentive gap of I'm noticing the tendency to, do I want to go that way or do I want to respond in a different way? That can create that sense of noticing in a yin practice. Maybe your tendency isn't to fidget. Maybe your tendency isn't to tell yourself stories, but maybe there's a part of you that you continue to tense or to contract or to shield or to guard. What would happen if I softened that place? What would happen if I
Mhm.
allowed some vulnerability there? What would that experience be like?
Yeah, absolutely. To give up
Mm.
the struggle, what would that feel like?
Yeah,
To
because
stop
for some
fighting,
people, the
yeah.
struggle is the thing, is their response to the
Mhm.
situation, is it gives them something kind of juicy and exciting feeling to do. What would it feel like if I
Mhm.
gave up that struggle? Mm.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully we have asked a lot of questions that have gotten people curious about their yin practice, whether they're interested in changing range of motion, whether they're interested in caring about their fascia or not. There are a million other things that you could also be focused on in yin. And I think all of the sort of hidden secret benefits that we've talked about really coalesce on space and time. That there is this roominess in the yin practice that we don't have in more active practices, and we usually don't have in life either, to pay attention to the things that would normally sneak outside of our conscious attention as we're kind of racing in the car from place to place. All of the things that we wouldn't notice, we have the opportunity to notice in a yin practice, and we can then make more informed choices about how we respond to what comes up.
Mhm.
Do you
That's a
have any?
beautiful summary.
Kind of took us right back to where we started. Do you have
Yeah.
anything else that you want to leave people with as a sort of takeaway? Maybe they're people who have been approaching their yin practice with one specific aim of either caring for their soft tissue or improving their range of motion, or maybe people have not tried yin at all. Is there a sort of takeaway you'd like to leave people with?
Ah, gosh, there's many that come to mind. I think the first one is just to stay curious, to be
Mm,
curious about what comes up, that there's not right or wrong. Whatever comes up becomes part of the practice, and to investigate that and to keep a beginner's mind. But I think that sense of curiosity, it awakens a part of ourselves that we start to lose as we get older.
I love that. And I think curiosity has come up in almost every podcast episode that we've done. It seems to be the secret sauce of yoga medicine. Curiosity is
Mhm.
kind of keeps us open
Well,
to
it's
everything,
why I
doesn't it?
listen to the yoga medicine podcast
Because we
while
love
I'm
being
cleaning my
curious.
house.
Filling that space. No, I 100% agree, because we've talked about all kinds of things. We've talked about staying power, being still. We've talked about recalibrating our senses to more subtleties. We've talked about appreciating connections within ourselves and others, with ourselves and the world around us. We've talked about the subtle energetic body, the meridians, and the experiences that we can have of them. We've talked about self compassion and self awareness and interoception. But all of these things require us to be interested in, the experience, to have
Mm-hmm.
that kind of curiosity of what's going on, what am I feeling, how am I being drawn
Yeah.
to respond, and how would I like to respond.
Mm-hmm. That curiosity about yourself,
Mm.
all the facets of yourself. Yeah.
So we will link to a blog post of yours that you've written that explores these secret benefits of yin, these hidden benefits of yin, and some others for people who are curious and it's kind of piqued their interest. And we also have yin classes of yours on Yoga Medicine Online for people who want to experience the way that you teach yin without the physical in-person connection, but with all of the space and time at home to kind of hit pause and stay longer in a pose. I won't talk about the fast forward button, but to hit pause and stay longer is
Yes.
one of the wonderful things about practicing online. For those who are interested in you and your approach and want to know more about you, where would you send them?
So two classes that come to mind, the yin yoga for awakening compassion, I think is what it's
Mm,
called. I ask questions throughout that. Like I mentioned before, I love to pose questions when I teach. And then the other one is yin yoga for the water element.
great. Well, we will link to those in the show notes for people who are Yoga Medicine Online members, or you can use a free 7-day trial to check out those classes. And then where would you send people to find you in the giant world wide web, the interwebs?
You can find me now on, I own a studio called This Land Yoga in Oklahoma City, and the website is just thislandyoga.com.
Great. Well, that's certainly gotten me thinking about yin. It's not a style I practice a huge amount of. I don't often do a dedicated yin practice, but it's the depth of winter right now in New Zealand. And maybe you've inspired me to find a little quiet space and to get curious today.
Absolutely, do it.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight with us today, Shannon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.